Okay, well, just to be mindful of our time, let's go ahead and get started. Good afternoon and welcome everybody. Thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon to join us. My name is Fernando and I'm with the Region 9 Head Start Association, and I'm excited to be here as your webinar host for this afternoon. So feel free to contact me via the chat option of Zoom with any logistical questions you may have throughout the session. If you experience any issues with the audio, with the connection, if you have any questions in general about the session, feel free to send me a message and I'll respond to it behind the scenes as needed. Just so you know, today's session is being recorded and will be made available for on-demand access roughly within the next 24 to 48 hours. Once the recording is ready, you may find it up on our YouTube channel. All registered participants will receive 2 follow-up emails regarding the session. The first one will go out as soon as we end our live session this afternoon. And that email will contain a certificate of participation for all of you who are tracking your PD hours. The second one will go out once the recording is ready for access. And that email will contain a link directly to our YouTube channel where you can watch the session once it's completed. Due to a limited time today, we ask that you keep all your questions, put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A, and we'll allow the last few minutes of the session for Q&A, and we'll do our best to address them live as time permits. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to pass it along to Luis Bautista to kickstart the session, and I just want to thank everybody, and I hope you enjoyed this session. Take it away, Luis.
Thank you, Fernando, and thank you again to everyone for joining us this afternoon. We welcome you to part 1 of this LACOE webinar series, an innovative approach to mobile services for young children. And we thank you again for your interest in our newest mobile superstars, what we call Hope the Bus and Hope on Wheels. And if you were on just the last minute or so, you got to see one of them in action at our Santa Fe Springs office. I'm Luis Bautista, Assistant Director for Program Design and Effectiveness at the Los Angeles County Office of Education, Head Start and Early Learning Division. And joining me this afternoon, Terry Lideker, Controller with the Controller's Office at LACOE, and Lilibeth Morelos, Procurement Services Assistant with Business Services. I will say Terry was also with our Head Start Division not that long ago as our Assistant Director for Fiscal Controls and Accountability. So she is intimately aware of the important work that these 2 mobile units will do for our grantee. So thank you, Terry and Lilibeth, for joining us this afternoon. I want to go over the training objectives that we have for this webinar. So next slide, please. In this webinar, what we hope is to be able to accomplish 2 things. One is to have you learn about the rationale for developing this innovative mobile services for families. And 2, to gain an understanding of the procurement process for selecting and securing the mobile units. Perhaps we will inspire you to think about this kind of service delivery and what it may mean if you choose to go down this road. Next slide, please. When we decided that we wanted to be able to offer services via these mobile units, what we wanted to make sure we did was that we aligned this effort to our strategic plan. And both Hope the Bus and Hope on Wheels align to our current 5-year strategic plan, and specifically to 2 visionary anchors. And you see those listed here on screen. One is that we want to be able to create seamless prenatal to college and career education continuum, and 2, to develop innovative program delivery that is responsive to community needs. And so with these 2 things in mind, we decided that we wanted to be able to explore a new method of service delivery. Next slide, please. Our LACOE community assessment also showed that there was a need for infant, toddler, and preschool early education across the state, clearly across the county, and most certainly in our LACOE service area. We also found that additional support was needed for families experiencing homelessness who are in unique circumstances, and that additional support was also needed for very young children with disabilities and different needs. Next slide, please. We also, in looking at how we could do this, really analyzed our various funding through both state and federal sources, and determined that we could do a very innovative approach to services, what we call a we come to you approach. The data in our community assessment supported that both state preschool, general childcare, and our newest funding source, inclusive ECE, would be able to support the work of these two units. So we are committed to sustaining the mobile services for families with children ages birth to 5, and developing an innovative method of service delivery through the use of these particular RVs. Next slide, please. And of course, because all of us need to really make decisions that are driven by the data that we collect, our community assessment data highlighted the need for these community-based services, which is why we maintain MOUs, like many of you do, and develop strong relationships to collaborate with community-based organizations such as regional centers and others. Next slide. We've also found that the needs have increased for special populations such as pregnant women, children in foster care, families experiencing homelessness. We have a very high cost of living here in Los Angeles County, and that remains a concern as we view poverty guidelines for the state versus federal requirements. And we know that many of our families are considered essential workers, and many continue to need early learning programs for their children. So in order to ensure that we were successful in launching these services, we needed to make sure that we had key stakeholder involvement from the very beginning. And so what we did is that we kept our LA County Board of Education updated on the data from our community assessment to ensure that there was an understanding and board buy-in and ultimately board approval for moving forward. We also wanted to make sure that we could fund the project. So we worked with state and federal funding, both Office of Head Start and California Department of Education. We wanted to make sure that we sought input and kept parents, especially those on policy council, informed as the project progressed. So there were numerous presentations done to ensure parent involvement. And then of course, we established new and revised existing MOUs and interagency agreements with local education agencies, regional centers, and other partners. And lastly, we developed and provided comprehensive training about the need for mobile services. And in addition to that, we trained our partners, including delegate agencies, LEAs, regional centers, and others, so they could learn how to take advantage and maximize the use of these units. So that gives you kind of a sense of how we started. I'm going to hand it over to Terry and Lilibeth next, who'll discuss the budgeting and procurement processes that got us much closer to making this a reality. Terry?
Thank you, Luis. As Luis introduced me, I'm Terry Lideker. I'm the controller for Los Angeles County Office of Education. And in my previous role, I was, as Luis said, the Assistant Director of Fiscal Controls and Accountability at the Head Start program, also here at LACOE. In that role, I was able to be involved with the design and the purchase. Now I'm over in the contracts unit. So I got to be involved in this project firsthand, moving it through. And Luis started to describe the funding. We did take advantage of one-time only funding from OHS and as he described through the IE grants, contracts with CDE. We used a wealth of our community assessment data as well as other data and some anecdotal and more empirical data that we needed a we come to you model the idea came to fruition during our strategic planning process. And so we put all of that information together and used that to build our rationale that we submitted to the Office of Head Start and then California Department of Education as we pursued funding for 2 RVs. So after we built the rationale and submitted for the funding request, we put together a work group consisting of our facilities folks, all of our managers, content area experts, our fiscal staff, and we all put together a comprehensive plan of what the components of the bus would look like. I cannot stress enough the critical part of that piece of pulling together the folks that are actually going to operate the services in the unit. This is not something that your fiscal folks can do for you or your contracts people. You must have your program folks at the table designing the inside of the bus as you go. You will save yourself so much time if you do that up front. You also have to deal with storage and those things. We found a really unique resource right in our own office. We knew that we would need some technology services. So we asked one of the technology services to join us for an IT consult. And it turned out that that person had previous military transportation, so understood where the restrooms need to go in terms of weight and load and all of that good stuff. So you probably have some resources untapped out there like that that I encourage you to pull upon, because the more, in some projects this doesn't work, but in this case, the more hands you have involved in this, the better, you'll have a much better outcome. So we ballparked from doing some searches and so forth that our units were going to come in over 500,000. And so when we did that, we added in all of our planning costs, our supplies, our staffing to operate them ongoing, and our startup staff for the units, all of those costs. And that is what we submitted in our request. On your slide in front of you, you have a procurement process, and I'm going to have Lily Beth talk about that, but I just wanted to, while I'm up here, talk about the fiscal accountability and the in-kind match piece. Keep those in mind. All of your records and your procurements and so forth, they need to be very clear. In most cases, you are going to be required for an in-kind match. I encourage you to speak with your regional office about that, particularly if you're using one-time funding. If you meet the criteria for a non-federal waiver request, I encourage you to explore that with your regional office, because you may have an opportunity there that may take away one more hurdle to being able to put together your project. And with that, I will turn it over to Lily Beth Morales, who actually was involved in the contracting at the time that it occurred. So I give it to you, Lily Beth.
Can we move it to the next slide, please? Hello again, everyone. My name is Lily Beth Morelos. I'm the Procurement Services Assistant from LACOE, and I'm the lead person in contracts tasked to assist Head Start in their procurement of the RVs. Our team was first notified of this intent to procure RVs March of 2019. And so then we started our research to gather information on RVs and RV companies, since this is all new to us. So our initial recommendation was to process a bid, which in this case is going to be a 6 months or an even longer process, because we then need to contract with a consultant to develop the specifications for us. And then we have to complete the bidding process and then allow time for the award of contract and delivery of the RV. So by choosing this option, we know for sure that there's no way we are meeting OHS and CDE funding deadline. So then we looked for other options that we can have. And so we started checking on other local educational agencies that may have done similar procurement as our starting point. This led us to a similar project that was completed by the city of Las Vegas. Our team then reached out to the procurement team of Vegas to get more information. And from there, we discovered that they used an existing piggyback contract initiated by the Port of Portland in their purchase. By piggybacking is when you use an existing contract that was awarded from a bid completed by another public entity to acquire the same commodity at the same price. So by piggybacking, LACOE will save a lot of time and money, because we don't have to do our own bid and we don't have to pay for a consultant. So we reached out to the team of Port of Portland in June of 2019 to get all the information that we need to review. And that would include, or that included the copy of the RFP or the bid. We wanted to ensure that they've posted the ads. So we asked for a proof of public posting of ads. We asked for a copy of the awarded vendor's proposal. We asked for a copy of the award letter and the contract. These documents were all reviewed to ensure that they're meeting public contract code requirements and LACOE board policies. So by July of 2019, we have completed our vetting process and have made the determination to proceed with the piggyback contract. And so right away, we reached out to Farber Specialty Vehicles and had the following simultaneous tasks completed. We had scheduled meetings with Farber and Head Start team to finalize the RV specs, requirements, and cost. And at the same time, we started drafting and negotiating the contract with Farber. So by September of 2019, we have a fully executed contract. And then the following month, we had our Head Start team visited the Ohio factory to finalize the design. So all in all, the procurement process took about 15 months from research to delivery. The first RV was completed and delivered on June 12th. The second RV came in on July 16th. I'll hand it over to Terry for the next slide.
This is a schematic of the RV unit. Some of the things that you would be able to customize is, I know this is a smaller picture, but in the middle of the RV, we opted to have like a meeting space and or a classroom space to demonstrate what a Head Start classroom would feel like, or early Head Start. We did the same thing on the outside, created some outdoor classroom space, but this is a schematic of what it looked like on the inside and from the outside. The measurements, you have to determine how you're going to store this thing prior and then see what space you have available. They do have larger and smaller models, is my understanding. This is the one that we went with. Also, there's a certain type of driver you need if you get over a certain weight. So you want to be aware of what that is in your state. But anyway, so that you have it for reference, this is the schematic. Next slide, please. Okay, so some of the features that it has, and we've talked about this a little bit, we do have storage for the supplies to create our outdoor classroom environments. And some of the things that we didn't readily think about, but quickly came to our attention, is things like if you're going to do it at a park, is the grass going to be wet? So you need to take tarps, little tables and chairs, you know, to set up. And then also something for to keep the kids kind of in the tarping area, some type of fencing or barrier that is lightweight that your drivers can move around for you. We had indoor and outdoor hand washing installed, and there's awnings on the outside and the hand washing is under the awnings. We have indoor and outdoor big screen monitors as well as audio. So some of your optional spaces in there, our program chose to have an exam room where they could do some basic medical services if we were going to support like family child care homes or whatever the case may be. We have an exam room for that. And we can also turn that space into a meeting room, and then it can be used for recruitment, training, or just office space if you have staff on site. It also has a kitchenette, a restroom. Restroom is wheelchair accessible, as is the unit itself. There's an actual lift at the end of the unit for wheelchair access. Next slide, please. So there will be maintenance, storage. So we thought about that in advance of where will we park it. We were able to get an additional warehouse space, if you will, where one of our administrative offices is located. In that unit, we had to install, because you have to think about, they have restrooms, so the tanks have to be maintenance. So we had to install drains and so forth so that the RV could be emptied on a regular basis, cleaning, but you have to have room to do all of that. One thing I would suggest looking into, if you're not able to get your own space for storage, is perhaps have a conversation with any of your local school districts that run a bus operation. You may find that they're willing to rent or lend or give for free you some storage space for your unit, particularly if it's serving their students. In terms of maintenance, be aware if you don't have the space to do immediate hookups and drain your tanks and all of that good stuff, know how far away those facilities are. For us in LA County, you think we have quick access to everything, but from where our office was at, it's about 20 miles. And that doesn't sound like a long ways, but it is, you know, when traffic is bumper to bumper most of the day. And so we took that into consideration. Where would we drain tanks? Not drive to Orange County every day, which was the closest one for us. So we decided it behooved us to install the necessary equipment and drains in the storage space that we rented. And then we had to write all of the protocols to go with all of this. So how do you park the bus? Who parks the bus? Who maintains the bus? Who takes it for oil changes? And oh, by the way, where do you take a vehicle of this size for an oil change? So those are all things to consider as you start, both in the planning piece, right? But also as you get ready to put it on the road. If you're going to use it for delegate agencies, of course, you want to have your policies and procedures done in advance to train them, right? We operated this primarily at the grantee and then go to delegate sites. So it was important that everybody involved have safety trainings. And I believe, am I dabbling into the next slide here? If you could advance the slide. Yeah, I was dabbling into the next slide. Okay, so part of those protocols you want to set up is because you're going to train whoever is going to use it. And so some of the things to think about is that if you're parked at a school, at a park, you're doing a recruitment event and there's imminent danger in the area, what do you do with anybody on board? Where do you go to? What is that protocol? It's probably the huge one, is what to do in an event like that in terms of safety, but you need protocols for everything. Who's going to stock the RV for what event? In LACOE's case, we did it by content area. So in the planning piece, we consulted with each of these areas that you see listed on the slide, the education geniuses, our friends and family and community engagement, mental health folks, disability, just every area, our facilities people, our IT people. We consulted them in the planning phase, not only for design of the bus, but also what do you need to be kept on the bus in terms of supplies so that you can operate your service area when you get on it. So we pre-established that, who would do that, who would order it, and who would keep the bus stocked. Those are all things that should be in your policies and procedures. I think I have covered everything on this slide, and I believe the next one is back to you, Mr. Bautista.
Thank you, Terry, and thank you, Lilibeth. As you can see, it's a very involved process at the front end, certainly with, setting up your proper procurement procedures, the design process, and then of course, getting ready to launch services by establishing all of the appropriate protocols and thinking through of all of the possibilities. But once you get through all of that, then you get to the point of really getting these units out into your communities, marketing the units and their services, and getting hopefully a lot of people excited about what these type of mobile units can do. And so marketing is a key part of our own mobile plan, and that started with naming the buses. We decided on Hope, because that was what Head Start and these buses represent to our communities. And we provided information about the buses to all of our community partners and the public through our websites, as well as through all of our delegate agencies. So word started to get out quickly, and sure enough that these new units would be available for services. And I want to talk to you about the distinction between the two for the next few slides. Let's start with Hope the Bus. Hope the Bus is really created in order to focus on specific activities for Head Start and early Head Start. And if we go to the next slide, we'll talk more about Hope the Bus at this point. And then we'll get to Hope on Wheels, which is specifically to support children with disabilities later on. Hope the Bus is going to travel to regional centers, to LEAs, to our own Early Head Start and Head Start delegate agency sites, as well as to housing developments, libraries, community events, and other identified areas to help reach and recruit families and children. What we know that the unit can offer, of course, is space for comprehensive services. As Terry mentioned, we have an exam space, so we can do exams. We can help meet with parents. We also have an opportunity to use these units for either temporary or urgent needs socialization sites, should those become necessary as we go through the program year, as well as an alternate site for home visits with families who may be experiencing homelessness, who may live in hotels or other places that have no visitor policies. So we really wanted to make sure that the units were multifaceted, that they provided opportunities to do a whole host and range of services, not just one or two things, but that it can transition depending on the agency, right, or the needs of families. And as we know, those needs shift and change, sometimes within the same program year, but often from year to year. Hope on Wheels, which is the next bus, and on the next slide, is really focusing on helping us support parents and their children under 3 who may have disabilities and who are receiving regional center services and or transitioning to home-based early childhood education settings. And much like Hope the Bus, Hope on Wheels is set up so that we can show parents examples of high quality services that are available in inclusive early learning settings. So again, very specialized in terms of its focus. It helps promote services to children under 3 with suspected disabilities, as well as expose parents and caretakers to a setting with a knowledgeable and continuously trained staff. So both units will have the support of subject matter experts that will either go along to the site or to the event in order to support staff at that agency or at that event. The Hope on Wheels unit is also an alternate site for various services, including behavioral, vision, and hearing screenings. And it serves as a location to possibly conduct IEP or IFSP meetings if necessary. And when we finally got to the point of launching these services, something happened, something that I think we're all very familiar with, and that is we went through a little bit of a pandemic. So all this work, right, leading up to launching services, pandemic is here. And so it kind of made us, take a little bit of a different turn. What we did is once the buses arrived, we had everyone mask up, right? Follow all the safety guidelines. And we said, we need to get these out into the community. And so in September of 2020, that's what we started to do. And we started that by first, of course, introducing these units to our LA County Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Deborah Eduardo, who took the first tour. And we're going to show you a very brief clip of that at this point. Next slide, please. There's another slide that I'd like to just kind of walk you through in a moment. So if we can go to the next slide, give you kind of a closer look, if you will, at both the exterior and interior of these units, and specifically Hope the Bus here. So you can see just from the front vantage point, these are fairly large RVs, right? They take up a lot of space. And as Terry mentioned, they can come in various sizes. I think we chose the jumbo size, but you know, we are also really looking forward to having them deliver a lot of great services as we roll them out. Here you can see just from the side view that when parked in a regular parking lot, this can take up, I think, 5 or 6 separate parking spaces. So that's a major consideration for both how you want to store this and when you want to take it out into the community for specific events. Here you see the interior there in the center, meeting space, as well as side benches, which can be purposed or repurposed for either children, families, both. You may need this just for staff purposes. You see that, you know, every inch is maximized for use. And again, what you bring into the unit will also dictate what kind of services you may be prepared to offer on any given day. So right now you see some learning materials, you know, a little reading corner for children. But then of course, we know that once working with families and community partners, you need to have other things available. So you see there's a sink. You know, safety protocols are huge right now and will continue, but you have a space for, you know, other perhaps materials to be stored on top and below. And if we move to the back of the unit, here's where you can see a wheelchair accessible restroom, as well as, you know, supplies that can be stored in the back, again, to support indoor and outdoor activities for wherever you may be utilizing your unit. In the next photo, you can see some of our staff there in the parking lot. But here, what I want to highlight is that awning that Terry mentioned a while back. That awning can come out and away from the unit. And that allows for shade, right? And you can set up an outdoor experience, whether it's a classroom or tables. If you're at a recruitment event, you know, that can be where people walk up, get information about enrollment, etc. And if they want to learn more about the kind of services you offer, maybe then get escorted into the unit to see the kind of screenings and assessments that children can receive as part of their participation in your program. So just a quick look at what you can also have if you choose to do a mobile service or a mobile unit for services. And what you'll see, of course, I think that stands out the most is the graphics, right? And I think that's important because you want these things to be obviously noticeable, but also inviting, right? For families, for children, you know, often families are afraid to walk into a particular building or go seek services at, you know, a site. But when they see something like a unit like this that's very friendly, welcoming, they're more apt to maybe go up and say, I want to learn more, right? What is this about? And that can be a key way of identifying those families that you may be able to serve. So again, just a quick look at the interior and exterior of this, and we'll go on to the next couple of slides before we open it up for questions and answers. You know, the pandemic was not something we were thinking about when we started the planning of all this way back when, but we responded to that in a number of ways. And, you know, we quickly moved our own services, just like many of you, to a hybrid and virtual learning format to accommodate families that needed to be safer at home. And then, of course, in September, the units became available and we started to roll them out into the community. You know, the mobile units originally were used to promote Head Start and early Head Start recruitment by conducting what we call drive-arounds. We would select a community in one of our delegate agency service areas, and then, you know, would just make sure that the bus was out there, you know, from morning to afternoon, just kind of highlighting the fact that Head Start is still here. There are services being offered, right? And that became a way for families to, again, contact and seek services. And then in the winter and early spring, we implemented services with additional precautions, of course, staying 6 feet apart, requiring masks, limiting the number of people on the unit to 2 at a time. And as we move to full reopening this summer and into the fall, we will enact a full implementation of all of the planned services with both Hope the Bus and Hope on Wheels. So in closing, as you can see, that we have made a big commitment to sustaining these mobile services for families with children ages birth to 5 through development of innovative methods for service delivery, such as We Come to You. And we've done this because our children deserve the best that we can offer. And, as we encounter more and more needs with families and children, we need to be more and more innovative in terms of how they can access those services that they so very much need. This has been part 1 of this webinar series. In part 2, which will be available on June the 29th, you're going to learn about program design, implementation, and evaluation of these mobile services. And it's also going to focus on how the units are being used for actual service delivery. So you'll get to see the units in action. But that more or less concludes our first part presentation. And we open this now to any questions that you may have for us.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Luis. We do have some questions that came in, and I'm happy to read them to you and the rest of the team. So the first question asks, is LACOE willing to let other programs use the layout designed for developing a mobile unit of their own? Also, are you able to share who you piggybacked with, as program may also be available to use this approach?
Certainly, you can, look at sort of what we've done with our design, right, and our layout. As Terry mentioned, we wanted to make sure we could maximize, right, every square inch of these units. And so a lot of consideration went into where things were placed, not only for accessibility, but also for safety purposes, right? So I think we've done a lot of learning along the way, and we'd be more than happy to share our lessons learned. I'll let Terry speak to the piggybacking issue, because I think that may be a little more complicated.
So piggyback, whether or not you're able to piggyback is based on your own agency's policies and procedures and what state you're in and all of that good stuff. Lily Beth shared which vendor we used, how we did our piggyback, and who we went through. Public information, Lily Beth, right? We can share that information.
Sure, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a note that Ed would like to answer a question live. Is Ed on?
He is with us. Ed, you can come in on camera and unmute yourself if you need to address the question. We do have some more here on the Q&A.
Okay.
What is the program model you offer in these mobile units? Are they used for regular daily services for the same children, or roam and not conducive for daily service to the same children?
Our intent, and that's a great question, our intent is to be able to support as many of our delegate agencies and all program options as much as possible. One thing to note is that these are not licensed classrooms. So this is not a unit that will roll out and park somewhere, right, and receive a group of children Monday through Friday, right? Rather, it is supporting our delegate agencies, whether it's center-based or home-based services, by coming in as a supplemental unit to either help boost the screenings and assessments that we may be behind in, to maybe offer a socialization site where one is not available, to really support ongoing recruitment, raise visibility about the program in the community, etc. So in that sense, we hope to serve many groups of children and many families throughout many communities in LA County.
Great. So one more question in the chat box. Is the bus and program available to visit in the future?
We would love to be able to showcase our services. And if you go to the next slide, I think we have some contact information where you can certainly, reach out. Dr. Sandra Williams, who is our Head Start Program Manager for Interdisciplinary Services and currently overseeing our Inclusive ECE grant, is also helping coordinate our mobile units in terms of how they go out into the communities, when they go out, et cetera. So at some point, we may be able to set up, just a showcasing if you want to come visit them, and we can have them available for viewing in our Santa Fe Springs office. Of course, the priority is going to be to make sure that our delegate agencies can schedule these to actually provide services to children and families. But when available, we can also make them viewable for those that are interested in learning more about how to design their own. And there you see also on screen Dr. Williams's email, williams_Sandra@lacoe.edu, where you can also reach us at our main office in Santa Fe Springs at 562-940-1775.
Great. Well, I believe I do have a few more questions. So in the chat, they're asking, where do we get an application to be qualified?
Can they come off mute and ask the question, Fernando?
Not in a webinar, but the question is made by Elizabeth DeFrancis. Elizabeth, would you mind putting in the chat box a little more clarification on your question and see if we can revisit it? In the meantime, let me jump onto the Q&A. Patricia asked, will you have a calendar for the mobile unit?
So we have designed a protocol, as Terry alluded to earlier in the webinar, that includes how to secure the use of our mobile units. So as we start to get, certainly in this new program year, requests, we will develop a calendar accordingly, right? That states the unit is going to be at this particular agency for the next 3 days, and then maybe next week at a community event, that weekend, etc. That is an ongoing process based on the needs of our programs and the events in our own communities.
Yeah, going back to Elizabeth's question, she asked, where do we apply for the grant for Hope on Wheels?
Again, there's no particular grant, right? Specifically for the RV units, what we did is we used our federal funding and our state funding to support the procurement, right, and the design of these units. And so that's something that you will need to look at as an agency, right, to see what you have available, what sources you may be able to utilize. And an important part, of course, of all of this is how you're going to sustain it, because you want to make sure that if you're making this commitment, that you can have, the ongoing use of these units year to year. And, there are ongoing costs, of course, everything from fuel to maintenance to insurance. So you want to make sure that you can plan for all of those as you make a decision about whether this is something that will definitely serve you and your communities.
Great. So one more question: what justification was used to secure? What justification was used to secure support and funding from the CDE, CSPPs, and others?
Right, and that's a great question, Michael, because you always want to make sure that you have a strong identified need. And what we did is we looked very closely at our community assessment. We looked at our own service area, and we worked closely with our 15 delegate agencies to determine the needs of the children and families coming into their programs. And as you recall at the start, I talked about the fact that our community assessment data really indicated an increasing needs to support children and families with disabilities. We're experiencing a rise in homelessness in LA County. And so families that don't have traditional housing may be better served, right, through a mobile unit that can come to them instead of them going to where we traditionally offer services, et cetera. So you really want to make sure that you're tapping into, all those sources, including your community assessment, to identify the correct data to make your justification. And we will be glad to share, all of that as well. If you're interested, just reach out to us, and we can kind of give you, a more thorough walkthrough of our justification and our initial thinking around moving forward with the mobile services.
Great. Well, I don't see any more questions in the chat or in the Q&A, but there is a comment here that I'd like to read and just give you some feedback. Denise Lee posted a comment on the Q&A saying, "This is an awesome undertaking. Congratulations to LACOE for taking it from vision to fruition to community. Very, very cool and innovative."
Thank you, Denise. Thank you very much for that. And let me just say thank you again to Lilibeth and to Terry, and Terry specifically, because she was early on part of the decision making in terms of moving forward with this kind of service delivery. So, that vision, wherever it exists in your own programs with your agencies, you're going to have early champions that are going to see, what this can mean for your communities and the families that you serve. You certainly want to make sure that they stay on board with you. So I'm glad to see that Terry's here with us today, and will be, I think, available also with the next part of the webinar, part 2. So please make sure you check that out as well. And thank you, Fernando, for all your support this afternoon, and to everyone who participated in this webinar.
Well, great. Before we wrap up, I just had a few reminders and announcements. First and foremost, thank you to Luis, Terry, Lilibeth, Dr. Williams for all your support, wonderful presentation, and just to bring this for us to showcase to our community. I'll also like to take a moment and thank Keisha Woods and her leadership team at LACOE for partnering with the Region 9 Head Start Association and for making these 2 sessions possible. So thank you so much. Before we wrap up, just note that this webinar session was recorded and will be made available for on demand within the next 24 or 48 hours. Once the recording is ready, you may find it up on our YouTube channel, and you'll be receiving an email, a follow-up email with the link once the recording is ready for access. So make sure you keep an eye for that. As we stated at the top of the call, this is one of 2 sessions. Follow-up session will take place and will be available as a pre-recorded early next week. And of course, an email will go out to promote the second session, and as well as a link for you to watch it. So stay tuned for that. Thanks again for our LACOE presenter panel that we had today, and we hope to see you on the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.